Steve Garvey is a failure. That is a statement that might sound shocking to anyone who grew up watching him play baseball in the 1970s and 80s. That might seem wrong, or harsh, or unfair to millions of people who watched him play for the Los Angeles Dodgers night after night during the baseball season. That is definitely not what television told you back then. That is not what the magazine covers suggested. That is not what the endorsement deals communicated. That is not what the perfectly coiffed hair and the all-American smile conveyed to the world. But that is exactly what Bill James, who is considered by many to be the greatest and most influential baseball analyst in the entire history of the sport, eventually concluded after he spent considerable time studying and analyzing every aspect of Steve Garvey's baseball career from beginning to end, with modern statistical methods and a highly critical eye. The world in America knew Steve Garvey in a very different way. The Los Angeles Dodgers had discovered their golden boy, the perfect guy who looked exactly like success, who acted exactly like success, and who appeared on television like the absolute definition of excellence and achievement. He was absolutely perfect for the cameras. Every photographer in America loved him. Every magazine wanted him on their cover. Every major endorsement company wanted him to be the face of their product and brand. Every talk show and every television program wanted him to appear as a guest. He became, without question, the most marketable baseball player of his entire era. Everything about Steve Garvey seemed to communicate excellence and achievement to the American public. But here is what nobody really wants to talk about when they discuss Steve Garvey and his career statistics and his Hall of Fame case. Here is the secret that was hiding underneath the surface all along. The moment you step into the clubhouse, the moment you listen carefully to what his actual teammates were really saying behind closed doors and far away from the public eye and the cameras, the entire story changes completely. His own catcher responded to a famous fight in the clubhouse with one single word. A Hall of Fame pitcher called his entire public image a complete facade. One of his best outfielders resented him because that outfielder knew he was actually the better and more valuable player. And decades later, when modern analytics finally came along and measured baseball value in a completely new and revolutionary way, they confirmed what the insiders had always known deep down. Steve Garvey was built entirely on image instead of substance. If you want to truly understand how baseball legends are made versus how they are actually earned through real performance and value, then hit that hype button right now and let me know you want more of this kind of deep, critical analysis of baseball mythology. The public version of Steve Garvey was manufactured from the very beginning of his career. He was built and constructed specifically for Madison Avenue advertising. He was exactly and precisely what every parent in America wanted their child to become. He was the role model. He was the ideal. But Steve Garvey actually could play baseball at a high level. He genuinely had real talent. Nobody can take that away from him. He accumulated one of the highest hit totals in the entire history of baseball. He maintained a very solid batting average over many seasons of consistent play. He played in games after games after games without ever missing time due to injury. His durability was absolutely legendary in every sense of the word. His consecutive games played streak set records that lasted for many years. That durability was real, and it was genuinely impressive to anyone who watched. And that particular mix of real talent and perfect public image made him absolutely perfect for the 1970s era of baseball. The media loved him with an intensity that was almost religious in its fervor. Television loved him completely. Madison Avenue loved him more than any other baseball player of his time. Fans who only read the box score loved him. Everything pointed clearly to greatness. Everything in the media suggested that he was one of the absolute best players of his generation. But there was a deep problem underneath that surface that nobody in the media wanted to discuss back in those days. Nobody wanted to question the marketing machine that had been built around him. To understand why Steve Garvey became so controversial and so deeply resented among those who actually knew him and played with him every single day, you must understand one fundamental concept that changes everything about how you view his career. He was optimized for the completely wrong definition of what makes a player actually valuable. He was built for an era that measured success through the newspaper box score that appeared in the sports section. He was built specifically for hit totals and batting averages and consecutive games played, and clean, professional baseball played in exactly the right way. He was optimized for statistics that looked very impressive when you glanced at them quickly without thinking too much. He was absolutely not optimized for actual team value or winning. He was not optimized for creating runs and championship moments. He was not optimized for the intangible elements of leadership. He played for the cameras. He played for the endorsement deals. He played for the way people felt when they looked at him and saw his image. His teammates understood this dynamic on a very deep level. The insiders in baseball knew this with absolute certainty and conviction. And when modern analytics finally came along years later and measured baseball value in a completely different and revolutionary way, when Bill James and other brilliant analysts started using advanced metrics like wins above replacement, everything that the insiders had always suspected based on their instincts got proven with cold, hard numbers. Let us start with the modern case against Steve Garvey, because this is the most damaging and revealing piece of evidence. Number 7 in our complete examination is the statistical revolution that happened decades after his playing days came to an end. When Bill James and other brilliant analysts started researching and investigating what actually makes a baseball player valuable, when they looked at advanced metrics like wins above replacement and on-base percentage and run creation and overall efficiency, Steve Garvey's shiny reputation fell apart like a house built on sand. His career wins above replacement sits at 38. The average Hall of Fame first baseman has around 65. That gap between those numbers is absolutely enormous, and it cannot be explained away or dismissed. According to modern measurement and analysis, according to how baseball people and analysts now understand and calculate true value, Steve Garvey was nowhere even close to Hall of Fame level. The problem was fundamental, and it was deeply rooted in his approach. He was incredibly inefficient as a baseball player. He did not walk, he did not draw bases on balls the way genuinely great hitters do. His on-base percentage was only .329, which was barely above average for his era. So while he got many hits throughout his career, and while those hits certainly looked very impressive on the surface, they did not actually create runs the way you would expect them to. He made a tremendous amount of outs for someone with his reputation, more outs per season than Hall of Famers who played at his exact position. He hit into double plays at a disturbingly high rate, leading the league in ground into double plays twice. His power numbers were quite mediocre for someone who is supposed to be a Hall of Fame first baseman. He averaged just 19 home runs per 162 games. Nothing that would make anyone think superstar. When you measure actual run creation and real team value using modern statistical methods, Steve Garvey was significantly less valuable than his reputation and public image suggested. He was the ultimate compiler, someone who piled up impressive-looking statistics that did not actually translate into team success. Now, let us go back in time to the exact moment when the facade started to crack publicly in the clubhouse. Number 6 in our breakdown is the specific moment that changed everything in how his teammates genuinely perceived him. August 20th, 1978. Shea Stadium in New York City, the visiting clubhouse of the Los Angeles Dodgers, was about to explode into open conflict and physical confrontation. Don Sutton, a Hall of Fame pitcher known throughout baseball for being outspoken and direct in his opinions, and Steve Garvey got into a physical fight right there in the clubhouse in front of many teammates. But this was not just teammates having a casual argument or a simple disagreement. This particular confrontation exposed everything that insiders and baseball people had believed was wrong with Steve Garvey and his carefully constructed public image. Sutton had given a detailed interview to the Washington Post where he said something shocking and controversial. He called Garvey a complete facade. He said that Garvey's all-American image was calculated and planned by marketing people. He said that it was not authentic or genuine. He said that Reggie Smith, the quiet and unassuming outfielder, was actually the more valuable player to the team. He said that Garvey cared about Madison Avenue endorsements and building his brand, while Smith was actually producing wins with his baseball performance. When Garvey confronted Sutton about the quotes that had gotten back to him through the grapevine, they ended up wrestling on the clubhouse floor in front of their shocked teammates. Garvey got a scratched face and a red eye from the physical altercation. Sutton got a bruised cheek. But the most telling and revealing moment came when someone yelled out to break them up before they killed each other. Dodgers catcher Joe Ferguson responded with a single word that said absolutely everything about clubhouse sentiment: Good. That one word revealed everything about how the clubhouse and the team really felt about Steve Garvey deep down. The team did not want to protect him or help him. They were tired of him. They resented him deeply and genuinely. The entire roster felt actual relief and satisfaction watching Garvey get into a physical fight with one of his own teammates. Number 5 takes us directly to Reggie Smith and what he represented as a baseball player. Smith was the kind of player who produced at a significantly higher level when you actually analyzed the real numbers and really studied his actual performance. He had a better on-base percentage than Garvey. He had genuine power and ability. He walked more frequently than Garvey. He created more value per at-bat by a significant margin. He was genuinely more valuable by every single modern measure that actually predicts wins and championships. But Smith played his entire career in Garvey's shadow because of media attention. The endorsement deals went exclusively to Garvey. The magazine covers went to Garvey. The television appearances went to Garvey. The talk show appearances went to Garvey. Smith watched from the background and resented it deeply. The team resented this situation too. They knew, without question, that Smith was actually the better player. In 1977, both men hit 30 or more home runs as part of the famous four-man power display, where 4 Dodgers all hit over 30 homers in the same season. But Smith's method of production was far more efficient. His slugging percentage was significantly higher. His on-base percentage was higher. He walked much more frequently. He created more value every single time he stepped to the plate and took his turn. Yet Garvey chased the 200-hit milestone that year and won the MVP award, despite Smith being the more valuable player. That resentment was real and profound and lasted. The insiders, the guys who played with both of them every single day and knew their actual abilities, understood this completely. Smith was the better player. The media and the general public just did not know this fact. Number 4 is Joe Ferguson's good, that single, devastating word that told the entire story of the clubhouse dynamic. When Sutton and Garvey were wrestling on the floor of the clubhouse, when someone yelled to break it up before serious injury, when Ferguson responded with that single word, it exposed the depth of dislike and resentment that existed in the locker room. This was not friendly rivalry or healthy competition. This was genuine dislike from his own teammates and friends. And Ferguson's immediate response suggested that the entire clubhouse shared the same feeling about him. The locker room did not love Steve Garvey. They tolerated him as a professional. They played games with him. They won games with him. They went to battle with him on the field. But they did not respect him as a teammate and as a person. They saw him as someone more focused on his own image than on the team itself. They saw him as selfish in the way that hurts teams. Number 3 is something important that Tommy John, the great pitcher and a thinking man's player, noted about the infield that Garvey was part of. Garvey played with Davey Lopes at second base, Bill Russell at shortstop, and Ron Cey at third base, some of the greatest defensive infielders in baseball history. These 4 men played together for many years and many seasons. They were professional in every sense. They won many games together. They set many records together, but they were not close as human beings and friends. Tommy John specifically noted and commented that Garvey was isolated from the other 3. He lacked genuine camaraderie and friendship with them. The other 3 shared a real bond and a real connection with each other, but Garvey was separate and different. He was professional on the field. He did his job, but there was no real friendship, no genuine connection or bond. And when you play with the same guys for 8 straight years and develop no genuine friendship, that tells you something very important. It tells you that people who knew him well did not want to know him better. The facade did not crack with his peers because there was nothing genuine underneath for them to connect with. Number 2 is Bill James discussing Garvey's defensive abilities and his 4 Gold Glove awards. James said Garvey had a very small range at first base. He won 4 Gold Glove awards, but James argued those were misleading and not actually reflective of true ability. They were based on fielding percentage, on the percentage of balls touched that were caught without errors. But Garvey achieved that high percentage by simply not attempting difficult plays. He avoided hard chances. He did not dive for balls in difficult situations. He did not challenge plays that required range and athleticism. He let balls that other defenders might have reached drop untouched. So his fielding percentage was artificially and deceptively high, while his actual defensive impact was low. He prevented errors by not attempting the plays that would create errors. Additionally, Garvey had a weak throwing arm from a college football injury. First base does not require many throws compared to shortstop or third base. So it was masked by the position, but it was still a real limitation. James said directly that Garvey could not throw. Number 1 is the 1974 MVP race involving Lou Brock of the St. Louis Cardinals. This is the single best example of how Garvey benefited from image over actual production and value. Lou Brock set a record with 118 stolen bases that season. It was historically impressive and game-changing. He was a threat every time he got on base. He changed and redefined the way the game was played. But Garvey won the MVP award that year despite being less valuable. Garvey did not lead the league in any major statistical category. Mike Schmidt hit more home runs. Jim Wynn drew more walks and had a higher on-base percentage. Lou Brock set the stolen base record that changed baseball. But Garvey was the face of the most famous franchise in baseball. He looked like a superstar should look. He smiled like a superstar. He had the hair of a superstar. The baseball writers voted for the image. They voted for the all-American boy. They voted for the pretty boy with perfect hair. They did not vote for the player who actually contributed the most value. Lou Brock knew this reality. He said later that he did not lose the award. He was not given it. Garvey got it because of who he was, not because of what he actually did on the field. When Steve Garvey went to San Diego and joined the Padres in 1983, manager Dick Williams immediately saw through the entire facade and the carefully constructed image. Williams was known throughout baseball as a no-nonsense guy who believed deeply and passionately in grit and toughness and playing the game the hard way. And Garvey, with his perfectly coiffed hair and his obsessive grooming habits and his image consciousness, looked completely fake and artificial to Williams in every way. Williams thought Garvey was too good to be true, too perfect, too polished. He was not wrong about that assessment at all. There is a famous and telling story about a Padres team pool party where teammates decided to throw Garvey into the water as a team bonding prank. When he climbed out of the water, soaking wet and dripping, every single hair was still perfectly in place. Not one single strand was out of position. His hair had not moved. His appearance had not been compromised. That detail, that image of Garvey emerging from the pool with perfect hair, captures what was fundamentally and deeply wrong about Steve Garvey as a person and teammate. He cared more about maintaining his image and his appearance than about being a real part of the team. He cared more about looking like a superstar than about actually being one in the way that truly mattered. He cared more about what the camera saw and what the public thought than about what his teammates actually thought of him as a human being. He cared more about endorsement opportunities and building his brand than about winning championships and doing whatever it took to succeed. That priority system, those values, that is what made him different from his peers. Then came the personal scandals in the late 1980s that shocked absolutely nobody who had ever truly known him and understood what was really going on beneath the surface. Steve Garvey's personal life became public knowledge in ways that could not be hidden or managed or controlled by any amount of publicity machinery. He had fathered children with multiple different women while presenting himself as a family values guy to the entire nation. While being the all-American boy that every single family in America wanted to emulate. While being the guy on television telling everyone how to live their lives and what to value most. While married and promoting the ideal of family and traditional values in his public appearances and his endorsement deals for clean family products. His teammates, the people who always suspected something was deeply wrong beneath the surface and questioned the authenticity of everything about him, were not shocked at all by these revelations. They were completely and totally vindicated. They had been right all along about the true nature of Steve Garvey. What they always instinctively knew and felt in their bones was finally confirmed by facts and by public records. Steve Garvey was a complete and total facade. He was exactly what Don Sutton had called him back in 1978 when they fought in the clubhouse. He was marketing instead of substance. He was image instead of integrity. He was an act and a performance instead of an actual, genuine person. The cracks that had always existed underneath the perfect exterior finally broke open completely for everyone in the world to see. The man who had built his entire career on being clean and pure and perfect and all-American was revealed to be something else entirely beneath that surface. So here is what we know now, based on all the evidence and all the testimony and all the numbers. Steve Garvey was a failure at being authentic and genuine. He was a failure at connecting with teammates as a real human being. He was a failure at creating the kind of value his reputation suggested he possessed. He was a failure at being the player America thought he was when they watched him on television. That gap between public perception and hidden reality defined his entire legacy forever and always. That is what the legends tried to tell us all those years. That is what modern statistics confirmed beyond any doubt. He was good at baseball by narrow surface-level measures and counting stats. He was excellent at being on camera and looking good and maintaining the image. He was a master at marketing himself to the public and to corporate America. But at actually being one of the best players of his era, he fell far short. He fell significantly short of what his image and reputation suggested. The numbers show it clearly for anyone who studies them. The legends said it out loud when they dared to speak truth. The teammates knew it from daily experience and playing alongside him every single season. For all the criticism and all the ways that Steve Garvey fell short of his legend and his image, he still had one moment in 1984 that Dick Williams could not deny or diminish, no matter how much he wanted to. In the National League Championship Series, with everything on the line, with the team facing possible elimination, with the Los Angeles Dodgers coming at them with everything they had, Garvey hit a walk-off home run in Game 4. He came through when it truly mattered. He interrupted the doubts. He performed when it counted most. That moment does not erase everything else that we have discussed in detail here throughout this video, but it reminds us that he was still a baseball player. He was still capable of greatness in specific moments. He was still a competitor who knew how to perform. Those moments were real. The image was not. The difference between those two things is everything. Was Steve Garvey overrated, or was he just judged by the wrong standards for his era? You tell me. If you found this analysis interesting and eye-opening, subscribe, like the video, comment with your thoughts. Let us build a community of people who understand the real story behind the games we love. Thanks for watching. Now, before we conclude completely, let me spend a moment on something important that we should address. The truth about Steve Garvey is more complex than just simple criticism. He was not a bad baseball player. He was genuinely good at baseball. When we say he was a failure, we are not saying he could not play. We are not saying his hitting was worthless. We are saying that the gap between his image and his actual value was enormous and significant and continues to this day. The way America saw him was not the way his peers saw him. The way television presented him was not the way baseball insiders understood him. And that disconnect, that gap between those two realities, is what makes his story so important and so revealing. Think about this from the perspective of someone like Reggie Smith, who had to watch year after year as Garvey got the endorsements and the magazine covers and the television time despite being less valuable. Think about how that must have felt. Think about how Don Sutton felt as a Hall of Fame pitcher, having to sit in the same clubhouse with someone he believed was prioritizing his own brand over the team's success. Think about Joe Ferguson's frustration that his own teammate was more focused on looking perfect than on being a real part of the team. These were not jealous guys. The broader lesson here is about how we evaluate people and how we understand achievement. Steve Garvey is not the only person in the world who figured out how to build an image that was more valuable than his actual accomplishments. He is not the only person who understood how to market himself effectively to the public, but he is a remarkable case study because he did it in a sport where we have extensive statistics and extensive records. We can measure his actual value now with modern analytics. We have documents, we have quotes from his teammates, we have evidence. And all of that evidence points to the same conclusion. The image was more impressive than the substance. This does not mean Steve Garvey was a bad person necessarily. This does not mean he did not work hard. This does not mean he was not talented. It means that there was a fundamental difference between how the world saw him and who he actually was. And that difference is what his legacy should be remembered for. Not just his statistics, not just his all-American image, but the gap between those two things. That gap is the real story. That gap is what Bill James saw when he analyzed the numbers. That gap is what his teammates felt every single day. That gap is what modern analytics confirmed with mathematics and with data. Steve Garvey optimized for an era that did not value the right things. And when the era changed, when statistics changed, when how we measure value changed, his reputation could not withstand the scrutiny. The facade had been maintained for decades, but it was always just that, a facade. And underneath was simply a very good baseball player who was not great. Someone who compiled impressive statistics that did not actually translate into the value his image suggested. Someone who was perfect for Madison Avenue, but far less perfect than the cameras showed. That is the real story of Steve Garvey. There is one more thing we should explore in depth. The timing of when modern analytics exposed Steve Garvey's reality is itself interesting. It took decades. It took years of work by Bill James and other analysts to develop the metrics and the systems that could measure what was actually happening. The era in which Garvey played was one where we did not have the tools to understand his actual value. We had hit totals, and we had batting averages, and we had fielding percentages. And if you optimize for those metrics, if you play specifically to maximize those numbers, you can look incredibly impressive. You can fool a generation of fans. You can get endorsement deals. You can build a Hall of Fame case. You can become an American icon, all while actually creating less value than players who were less marketable and less telegenic. This phenomenon actually extends beyond just Steve Garvey. It is about how image and substance diverge in any field when the mechanisms for measuring actual value are inadequate or absent. In sports, before we had advanced analytics, in business, before we had comprehensive financial disclosure, in politics, before we had exit polling and statistical analysis, the most successful people were often those who understood how to leverage the available metrics, rather than those who were actually creating the most value. Steve Garvey just happened to be exceptionally good at this. Exceptionally skilled at understanding what the cameras wanted, what the magazines wanted, what America wanted to see. He built his entire approach around satisfying those demands rather than around actually being the most valuable player possible. What makes his story relevant today, what makes it important for you to understand, is that this same dynamic still exists. Image still matters more than substance in many contexts. Marketing still beats actual value in many situations. The beautiful people still get more attention than the actually talented people. The difference now is that we have better tools to measure what is real and what is not. We have analytics, we have data, we have statistics that allow us to see beyond the surface. And when we apply those tools to something like a baseball player's value, we can measure reality more accurately. Steve Garvey would not be able to fool us today. The numbers would expose him immediately. That is actually the important lesson. In the modern era, it is much harder to sustain a facade when the metrics are more sophisticated and more accurate. And that makes understanding how Steve Garvey succeeded so valuable, because it teaches us to be more skeptical of image and more respectful of actual data and actual measurement. The Dodgers infield of Garvey, Lopez, Russell, and Say is often remembered as one of the greatest infield combinations in baseball history. And in many ways, that is true. They played together for years and years and set records for longevity. But it is also important to understand what that infield tells us about Steve Garvey. The reason that infield lasted so long together, despite the tension and the lack of friendship, was because they were all professionals. They knew how to play baseball. They knew how to execute. They did their jobs. But it was not a brotherhood. And the fact that 3 of those 4 men formed bonds with each other while Garvey remained isolated tells us something profound. It tells us that Garvey's issue was not that he was a bad person in a moral sense. It was that he was unavailable. He was not present in the way that real teammates are present. He was focused on something else. He was focused on the image. He was focused on the brand. He was focused on maintaining the facade. When we look at the 1984 NLCS moment where Garvey hit the walk-off home run, it is important to remember that Dick Williams was already doubting him. William had already decided that Garvey was too polished, too fake, too focused on image. And yet, Garvey came through. That is what makes that moment so powerful. Not that it proves Garvey was great, but that it proves he was still capable. He could still perform. He could still do the job. But that one moment, that one game winner, does not erase a career of prioritizing image over substance, does not erase the resentment of his teammates, does not erase the discomfort of Dick Williams, does not change the statistical reality that he was far less valuable than his reputation suggested. This is why we have brought all of this evidence together and laid it out for you. Because Steve Garvey represents something important that we need to understand. He represents the power of image in shaping how people are perceived and remembered. He represents how it is possible to game the system when the system is not sophisticated enough to measure actual value. And he represents what happens when the gap between appearance and reality grows too large. Eventually, the truth comes out. Eventually, the facade cracks. Eventually, the insiders who knew the truth are vindicated. And that is the real legacy of Steve Garvey. So as we wrap up this investigation into Steve Garvey and what his career teaches us, let us be clear about what we have established with evidence and with numbers and with testimony from people who were there. Steve Garvey was a good baseball player. He was genuinely talented. He could hit, he had durability, he was professional. Nobody disputes that. What we have shown is that the gap between his image and his actual value was extraordinarily large. The media and the public saw him one way. His teammates and the statistics saw him another way. And when modern analytics finally gave us the tools to measure what was actually happening, it became clear that the insiders had been right all along. The image was more impressive than the substance. The marketing was more effective than the performance. The facade was more powerful than the person behind it. We brought you number 7, the modern statistical revolution that exposed his actual value. Number 6, the Sutton brawl that revealed Clubhouse sentiment. Number 5, Reggie Smith, who was better but got no credit. Number 4, Joe Ferguson's good, that one word that said everything. Number 3, Tommy John's observation about isolation. Number 2, Bill James on the defensive illusion. And number 1, the 1974 MVP that went to image instead of value. All of these pieces together paint a picture of a player and a person who was optimized for a different era, a different set of values, a different way of measuring success. The lesson for all of us is this: be skeptical of image, be respectful of data. Understand that what looks best is not always what is best. Understand that the most marketable person is not always the most valuable person. Steve Garvey is a perfect example of that principle. His career was a triumph of marketing over substance. And that is how history will remember him. Not as a great player, not as a Hall of Famer, but as a cautionary tale about the power of image and the importance of looking beyond the surface to understand what is actually real. Before you go, we want to make one final point about Steve Garvey and how his story continues to matter today. His Hall of Fame case has been debated for many years and will continue to be debated. But the debate has changed. It is now about understanding what those statistics actually meant in terms of team value and whether the narrative around a player's career matches the statistical reality. And on all of those modern measures, Steve Garvey falls short of Hall of Fame standards. That is not an opinion. That is what the numbers show. His legacy will always be complicated and contested. Some will remember the all-American boy with perfect hair. Others will remember what his teammates said and what the analytics revealed about his actual value. Both of those views can coexist. Steve Garvey was a talented baseball player who understood how to leverage an era that did not have the tools to measure actual value. And that is what makes his story worth telling and worth understanding. He was the ultimate case study in how image can matter more than substance when the mechanisms for measuring substance are inadequate. That lesson transcends baseball. That lesson truly applies to all of us today.